Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome to another episode of our show. Today, bringing another really awesome guest involved in science, technology, medicine, creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Karen Knudsen, the Chief Executive Officer of the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy. They are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. They're driving the next generation of cancer treatment, accelerating development of various breakthrough immunotherapies, ultimately, as they say, to turn all cancers into curable diseases. Dr. Knudsen most recently served as the Chief Executive Officer at the American Cancer Society, as well as the American Cancer Society's Cancer Action Network. There she led the organization through a really interesting period of transformative growth, significantly expanding their research initiatives, advocacy, as well as direct patient support initiatives. And prior to that, Dr. Knudsen served the Executive Vice President of Oncology Services over here at Jefferson Health, as well as Enterprise Director of the Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center, growing that organization to a multi-state oncology network, spearheading various advances in translational cancer research and increasing access to the most advanced cancer care. Dr. Knudsen is a globally recognized expert in prostate cancer, has hundreds of scientific publications, across various topics in that area, and has generated practice-changing discoveries along the way. She holds a PhD in biologic sciences from the University of California, San Diego, their MBA over here at Temple at the Fox School of Business, and we're honored to have with us a lot of really great topics to get into today. Dr. Karen Knudsen, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I look forward to all these themes we're going to be getting into, and as people that watch this show usually know, I love to dive into our guests' publication record. Yours was extremely extensive, but two things stood out to me at the very beginning, and I just want to start off there. And those were two papers that you published back in the early '90s. One on sort of allelopathy, or the ability of plants to inhibit other plants from coming too close to them, and then another really cool paper about fungus growing on corn and the ability of how that fungus, inhibits the corn's ability to kill it off. And, where you went after this into the world of, DNA repair and cell cycle checkpoints and all that, then takes over. But I would love to hear the background of how you connected both worlds, because clearly, the world of allelopathy gave us a lot of the great cancer chemotherapies in the 20th century. Would love to hear how this all started off.
Yeah, so believe it or not, that actually all connects. And you are hitting on something very few people realize. My first publication was in the American Fern Journal. And so, when I was growing up, I grew up in a military family. I didn't know a scientist. I'd never met a scientist until I went to college. So I was at GW. I was an undergrad in biological sciences. I always loved science and math, and I thought if you did that, then you have to go into medicine, and by that meaning go to medical school. So I went to GW thinking that this was my path, and I fell upon, it was just such a great place in the late 80s to be, studying science, because the pace of discovery really started to pick up. So I was doing laboratory internships. And one of my mentors, Dr. David Morris, really recognized that I loved science and I loved curiosity. And And he really said, look, I want you to go and work for a summer in the National Cancer Institute. And while that was before that could happen, I was actually taking plant biology. It was required for our curriculum, and we needed to actually do a project. So, I was out there in the woods studying allelopathic effects of trees, which is basically a fancy way of saying that trees, need to compete in their own environment. And so they secrete chemicals, some of them, that prevent other plants from growing around them. Otherwise, they would have to share resources. And so I actually studied that and what is the underlying way that this, particular species of tree prevented plants. And it turned out that they were, preventing these plants from germinating. It was pretty cool to see that I, as an undergraduate, I think I was 19 years old, right? I went to college kind of early. I was barely 17 when I started college. So I could take a project all the way from design with mentorship, right?
Mhm.
Through to data collection, assessing what that looked like in the landscape of the entire scientific universe using book stacks, right? This is pre-internet. And then with my mentor, write a paper. Like it was so amazing. And that was really what got me started on that path. And then I ultimately did. So that was the American Fern Journal paper. And then I ultimately did go do an internship at the National Cancer Institute over the summer at NCI Frederick. Uh, and that really set the stage for me for my whole career. So this is at the time yeast genetics was starting to become a thing.
Yep.
It was the HIV pandemic, and no one understood retrovirus. So here I was at the National Cancer Institute, but we were studying retrotransposition, so the way
Mhm.
that genes jump around in yeast in order to understand how how gene function works. But it also had a knock-on effect for HIV. So that really got me into like this rigor of genetics. So when I went to UCSD and published those papers as well, but not as first author, of course. But when I went to UCSD for graduate school, I was really focused on capturing this moment of the rigor of yeast genetics, of being able to interrogate human gene function. And so really was focused on that, went to a lab that was studying homologous recombination, so the way that
Mhm.
DNA repairs itself. And at the time, it was such a like an amazing collaborative. I mean, so collaborative in science, in my opinion. But there was this amazing spirit of collaboration where someone had created a whole series of just random mutations in genes in a yeast called Schizosaccharomyces pombe. Pombe
Mhm.
is actually as far away from baker's yeast as it is from human, right? But it's much more human-like in the way that it functions. Its genes have introns. It knows how to splice. And so many of the genes that we know now to control cell cycle were actually discovered in Pombe, and human genes were discovered in Pombe because that complementarity strategy worked. So I was given a mutant called RAD1 that we thought was going to be involved in homologous recombination. Turned out it was involved in DNA damage checkpoint repair. So then fast forward years later, and I'm still studying DNA repair in my own laboratory, but then translating it to the human experience. So it was actually a pretty quick clip from ferns to yeast and genetics into cancer biology, because that's where cell division and DNA repair, is so ultimately critical, to then leading to a lifetime of science and healthcare, because what I really care about is getting scientific discovery to patients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting, continuing along that line, that it looks like around 1998, I think you're doing your postdoc work at Ludwig Institute, and then this follows you to the University of Cincinnati. You start publishing extensively on prostatic carcinoma research, and you got papers from coactivator crew recruitment and nuclear translocation blockade, and every concept in between. And during this period, you start this work before the Human Genome Project even finished. So, needless to say, during this time period, a lot of new genes, a lot of new targets, a lot of new proteins fall into your lap as this work is going on. Take us to this little period before coming to Philly, because I think this is really very crucial, because you are a thought leader in prostate cancer, and would love to hear about how things took off in this decade or so of your work.
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked about this one because I think this is about the pivotal importance of mentors. So there I was at UCSD having cloned RAD1, which turns out to be part of the 911 complex, DNA repair complex, and and really try to interrogate the function of what that actually does for DNA repair. As I said, I had done that in yeast genetics, but I really saw that understanding cell cycle and understanding DNA repair checkpoints really intrigued me as a scientist. But as a person, I'm driven toward human impact. So I really wanted to go to a laboratory that was going to help me translate into the potential for cures of human disease, in this case,
Mm-hmm.
cancer. So I had, and we're just bathed in this at UC, in the San Diego environment. So I looked at a lot of different labs, and I walked into the lab of Webb Cavity. National Academy member, was the one to show that the Knudsen two-hit tumor hypothesis was correct by doing genome walking before the Human Genome Project using retinoblastomas, right? And had identified the retinoblastoma locus and said, this is what the problem is. This is why these children get retinoblastomas. The guy's just like a genius. So I walk into his lab, fell in love with his projects, which were on rhabdomyosarcoma, using strong genetics, human though, brain, rhabdomyosarcoma, and classic human genetics. So I interviewed for his lab, was really happy to get a position in his lab. He was running the Ludwig Institute at San Diego. And I thought I was going to go work in one of these preformed 3 groups. And by the time when I walked in, he sat me down across from his desk and he said, Karen, I want you to start a group on prostate cancer. Now, I knew zero about prostate cancer. And I was like, Webb, why are we doing this? And he said, here's the story. All of this incredible transformative work is coming in the breast cancer space. This is at the time that women had really advocated. The Department of Defense started to fund breast cancer research. And he said, and if you look at what happens with men and women, right? The incidence and mortality are almost equitable between breast and prostate cancer, but nobody understands prostate cancer. And I said, okay, well, that's awesome. Like, what's the plan? And he said, you figure it out. You go tell me. He goes, I'm going to help you. When you need something, if something gets in your way, I'm going to help you. He said, but find out what are the clinical challenges. Take a minute. And then let's figure out what to do. So I got super excited about this. Like, I love this like mentorship that I really tried to emulate. So in digging in, meeting with a lot of clinicians, spending time in urology, radiation oncology, medical oncology, I realized something I had not fully appreciated before, which is the challenge of prostate cancer is how to keep testosterone action in control.
Yep.
And that all therapeutics, including Nobel Prize in the 1960s, right, from Charles Huggins, basically showed that testosterone is the fuel that drives prostate cancer, and it drives those cells to grow. And what nobody knew was how that happened. Like, how do you connect the dot between how testosterone tells prostate cancer cells, but not every other cell that has a receptor for testosterone action called the androgen receptor?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen. I'm like, okay, that's a cool science problem. And if there's one thing I know, it's cell cycle. And so I'm going to connect that dot. So that's what I did and laid the blueprint for how it is that hormones drive prostate cancer cells to grow. And then what about that process goes awry in humans? And so then really started to connect that. And Webb was and continues to be just a phenomenal mentor for me. He said, when you look at Webb Cavaney's lab, the number of people who went on to make transformative discoveries, to lead their own labs, to change practice, it's pretty spectacular. And it's because he set it up this way of really truly grooming your independent projects. So always from the beginning, he said, when you're going to go, you take this with you. I took it all, right down to bottles of media, and that was the kind of mentor I tried to be too. I owe Webb Cavaney a lot. And then, we kept that having one foot in the clinic, one foot in the lab, was part of Webb's structure. So there were as many clinicians as PhDs in the lab. And so you grew up in this environment of, yeah, this is really nice that you're studying this phosphorylation event on this protein. But what does it mean for people? Was the ethos of the lab. And that was the ethos of then the lab that I set up and all of my trainees, I think, still have that ethos. And so it was just a phenomenal point in time where he recognized a clinical gap. What's a science program that you need to go after that clinical gap? always with an eye toward, if you're successful, is it going to be meaningful for people? And then ultimately in my career, it became easier to then take the clinical observation and bring it back to the lab. So I know that strategy is not for everybody, but it's for me. And I still spend a lot of time with prostate cancer patients. And
Hmm.
for me, it's real. When I think about what is driving me, in fact, there's a prostate cancer survivor here in Philly that I talk to by text almost every day, who is a patient at Jefferson Health. His name's John. I won't give his last name because he might not want me to give it, but and another patient, Lou, who is not a prostate cancer patient, but we connect literally every day on text. For me, it keeps it so real
Hmm.
of why we do what we do every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's really awesome. And again, you connecting the worlds of research and patient care. So this sort of becomes your world now because you come to Philly in 2015 to, as I mentioned, the bio head up, as executive vice president of oncology services, but also the Sidney Kimmel Center. And I live around the corner from there, and I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
I can just say, I've seen the transformation of this world here, this ecosystem, and it's been amazing. Just as a side note, my father-in-law was in a prostate cancer clinical trial over there. You gave him 2 years of progression-free survival, which was all the difference and made his life uh, much more meaningful. So I'll throw that back to you and thank you for that. Um, Take us. I mean, this is different now because you have research, you got patient care, but then you have translational research, which, as you were mentioning, that's a whole other thing. And ultimately, how we take those things on the bench and get to first in human. Your world changes a lot here. So to talk a little bit about these experiences, because I think it's extremely
Yeah.
important piece of your story.
So there was an important, so Philly, I mean, I am a Philly girl through and through, right? And so I love being here and I loved my experiences here. But there was an important like step just before when I was a tenured faculty at University of Cincinnati.
Okay.
I was so taken into the wing by the clinic there, like more so than I had ever been before. Yes, I was in a basic science department, but I found a lot of value in keeping current with what was happening in the clinic. Again, medical radiation and surgical oncology. Urology figured like super prominently for me there. And so I really got a chance to understand at pace how to keep up what was going on with the clinic, and it intrigued me. And so I put together this prostate cancer working group, I called it. Because
Mhm.
like, okay, we got to all start coming together because there were more scientists that were recruited that were studying prostate cancer. We're poised to do more. So I loved it. But at that point, and I found a lot of value in setting up multidisciplinary teams. And it made me really feel fulfilled as, again, as a scientist and as a person. So the challenge in Cincinnati at the time was that when you got to the point where your discovery needed to go into clinical testing, you couldn't do it because it just wasn't set up for that at the time. I think I know they've matured since then, so I don't want to bag on Cincinnati at all. I mean, they're an incredible group, and I was very thankful to be there. But that's when I was being recruited a lot of different places who wanted this. They wanted someone to come and set up multidisciplinary teams. And so what I loved about Jefferson Health at the time, like it was small, right? It was a NCI designated cancer center, so like exceptional science and exceptional clinic, but three hospital system in downtown Philadelphia. And the meeting with Lenny Gamella, Dr. Gamella, who was the chair of urology at the time, sold me. Like he understood the value of working with a scientist and he wanted it. Great. Then I went to go meet with the new head of radiation oncology. He wanted it. And then I met with the head of medical oncology, which at Jefferson is a department, not a division of medicine, and it is a strength. Neil Flamenberg, and he wanted it. And they all wanted someone to kind of bring all these parts together. And I was like, this is it. Like this is a place for me. I love to build teams that are going to be more effective, highly effective teams that are going to get things done. So it's what gets me out of bed every day. So I come into Jefferson and all this is true. So we start doing things that are easy. We met every Tuesday morning at 7:15 at the Starbucks at 10th and Chestnut.
Mhm.
Me and all of those chairs that we just talked about. Like, how are we going to make prostate cancer better? How are we going to learn from every patient? And how are we going to get trials into the clinic? So then fast forward, prostate cancer became one of our major signature programs in the cancer center. And we really started to grow that. In fact, it was, got an exceptional score from the National Cancer Institute for really being a standout. There aren't very many of those. In fact, there were very few of those around the country at the time. And so then we started to connect with other exceptional cancer centers. So I set up what I called the Amtrak Alliance with Hopkins. They have an exceptional prostate cancer program. And what does it look like if we set goals to start doing grants together, to run clinical trials together? And there's a guy, Ken Pienta at Hopkins, who like really also has this go get it spirit. And we all started to also connect underneath the umbrella of the Prostate Cancer Foundation led by Mike Milken. And I cannot say enough good things about Mike. I mean, he has really allowed, cutting edge, high risk, high gain prostate cancer research to thrive through the selflessness of his own philanthropy and passion. So then that started to help us fuel things that were going on at Jefferson to let us do those bold things that maybe weren't going to get funded through NIH. And so we really started to thrive. I became the deputy director of the Cancer Center. We were really, rising through the ranks in U.S. News and World Report. And then along comes probably the person I would mention is as my last and most transformative mentor, and that's Steve Klasko. So, Steve came in as the CEO. He recognized that cancer was really key to growth for Jefferson. He put the university and the health system under one umbrella. Brilliant. Put me on his team. I was the only service line leader as the head of oncology, clinical and research that reported directly to him. And then we went on this just massive growth phase. And he sat me down and he said, Karen, you need to run this place like the CEO of cancer. And I'm not going to get in your way. This is a theme here. I'm not going to get in your way. I'm expecting a lot of you. I'm going to hold you accountable. And if something gets in your way, let me know. So it was that same like ethos. And so we really ran with it. So, by the time I left, we were started off this 3-hospital system. We only delivered cancer care in 1. By the time I left to get recruited away to ACS, we were a 16-hospital system, wholly owned and incorporated across 2 states. And what I'm most proud of is creating a single entity that was cancer, which meant it didn't matter where you walked into the Jefferson system, you could expect the same quality of care. And that meant including clinical trials, right? Because this is the most advanced form of care for cancer. And so setting up, I told Steve, I'm like, look, I called it Cancer Care 360. I want to set up advanced care hubs out in the community where we can put phase 2, phase 3 trials out there so we can give everyone an opportunity to get access to the most advanced form of care. It was work and it required investment and it required commitment and infrastructure, right? But it was such the right thing to do. And our goals at Jefferson, our values, and all 33,000 people knew it because it was everywhere, was be bold, think differently, and do the right thing. And Steve really held us accountable to that. That's what your performance review was like. How were you bold this year? Did you think differently? Show me how you did the right thing. And we really held to that as an executive team. I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot in all the merger and acquisition about what worked and what didn't work. And doing the right thing became a really important component of how you made decisions. And so I'm very excited that that's still the model that's used at Jefferson now that it's a 35 hospital system. There's been a lot of change, but I would say, Steve was just a trailblazer and continues to be, in so many ways. And, shared the vision that if we're going to go to the trouble to identify all these potential solutions for, prevention, discovery, and cure of cancer, that we need to go to the trouble of making sure that they get to people and that we owe it to those patients to learn from all of them to refine the process. Not a scientist himself, but he understood the ecosystem, and I can't say enough good things about the guy.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about what you built here. And I joke with my wife. I didn't even know to see the Honickman Center go up. I was walking by one day. I'm like, where did this come from? And this gleaming, tower of glass and steel, and some of the, it was like science fiction movie in terms of the therapeutic environment. I take my hat off to
So
you.
let's talk about that for a second. So I
Please,
did the planning on the oncology side for the Honickman building.
it's amazing.
And, one of the things that we really wanted to have was a better experience for cancer patients in the chemotherapy suite, which, was on an older campus, the downtown. So, our patients are sitting in infusion in what would look like a dungeon for a long time because it was just such an old building that we couldn't do much with. And so, it was, although I wasn't there to see the opening, I've seen it since, and oh my gosh, I'm so proud. I have a lot of pride of the organizations that I've had the good fortune to be part of and help transform, and love that. Again, it's like part of I think there's a pattern with me. It's go to where you need to team build to make something better and think differently, be part of transformation, make it great, go on to the next thing.
Mhm.
That's tends to be what I do.
Before we move to American Cancer Society, I just want to ask one other thing because one part you had many titles during your time at Jefferson, and one of the ones that popped out to me was the fact that you were a chair and Hillary Kaprowski professor in the Department of Cancer Biology. Um, I know he passed away a little bit before you got there, but I worked with him for a brief period of time because the
Oh,
office again was right over here at 10th and to Locust. I was with a plant biotech company, getting back to plants for a second here. And my boss sent me down here. It's like, oh, there's a guy down here that wants to make cancer antigens and tobacco plants. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't realize Hillary Kaprowski. I didn't even know who he was at the time, but I was. Did you ever get a chance to meet him before you got to Jefferson?
no.
Amazing. Okay.
Unfortunately, I didn't. Yeah, it was really too bad. But it was such an honor to hold that chair. In fact, I've got my Hillary Kaprowski chair actually right here in my office. I look at it every day.
Cool.
And it was just I loved the way that the cancer lead was set up at the time at
Mm-hmm.
Jefferson. I think, all of the 72 NCI designated cancer center directors, we're still very close with each other. It's a special, we all help each other. We navigate patients to each other's, centers. We all feel how difficult that job, is. And at Jefferson, which is distinct from a lot of the other places, the science and the clinic were tied. And that made all the difference for me. It's one of the reasons I decided to go to Jefferson. It's one of the reasons I stayed at Jefferson. I think that's really important for people. I think the proof is in the incredible outcomes that happen at Jeff. So, I really felt very empowered to get things done in a way that, some of my colleagues were not at other NCI designated cancer centers because they had influence on the clinic, but no actual authority.
Got it. Got it. All right. Well, we'll come back to that, that bit when we get to the Parker Center and immunotherapy and some of those cool things. But let's stop by the American Cancer Society because again, this is you seem to take these positions in really critical times, and you take the CEO role at ACS at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I guess a lot going on. There are two really interesting papers that stood out to me. One that you published in Journal of Cancer. This was in March 2022, talking about the cancer care during the pandemic and what we need to think about in sort of mitigating these stresses on cancer care, depending on what comes next, which is extremely important. And then this other paper in the Journal of Surgical Oncology in 2023, talking about this tripartite approach to ending cancer, thinking beyond the translational work, thinking to things like social economic development and social determinants of health, advocacy, patient support, all the things that sort of around that ecosystem. Take us back to this time too, because this is another very important part of your story.
Yeah. Well, I know you know this because you were living it, but
Yeah.
COVID hit Philadelphia hard.
Right.
And it was really such an important time again to have a critical leader, and so I led oncology at Jefferson through the first peak and a half in Philly of COVID. And on any given day during those times, we would have 600 people in our inpatient unit, not cancer, but overall at
Yeah.
Jefferson that were COVID positive. And we didn't have, we were working without a net of trying
Mhm.
to understand how to manage this. Every morning, 8 o'clock, we had an incident, command meeting of how many events do we have? How many, How many COVID positive people do we have coming in? And from my perspective, I can't, unlike a lot of disciplines, I'm not shutting down cancer, right? Like we actually need to think through how it is we can navigate patients that are COVID negative to places where they can be much more protected because we suspected, and that turned out to be true, that they were much more susceptible to COVID. And I remember even having this conversation with Steve when masks were in very short supply and we absolutely needed them for our clinical staff. I advocated successfully and said, you know what, we got to mask up every cancer patient. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
but it's just key coming in. And then this is also where Steve's, I think, brilliancy really helped because, and lots, I think, has been written about this. We already did telehealth. Steve
Yeah.
required every provider at Jefferson to do a telehealth visit once a month before it was reimbursed, and everybody knew how to do it. So in comes COVID, and boom, we can scale. So now at the cancer center, we're thinking through, well, who doesn't have to come in? They had their labs done out in the community, and we don't need to put their hands on them. Like, let's bring them in. So gave me a lot of ideas of, like what needed to be done. We kept going on with clinical trials, we kept going on with surgeries. There was a lot. I felt I felt that leadership was so important there. And I had a great team at Jefferson underneath me at the cancer center. So I didn't have any intention of leaving. And then in comes this unexpected call. And I was being recruited to lead the American Cancer Society as CEO. Now, I loved Jefferson. I love healthcare, still do. And, kind of thought I would be doing that my whole life. And they pulled on my heartstrings in a way that really resonated with me because the American Cancer Society that I knew, the Philly version, had been a great partner. When I needed a little bit of funding for a cancer research program, I could go to
Hmm.
them. When we wanted to affect change at the state level or the federal level, I could partner with them in ways that we couldn't always do on our own because of being a 501(c)(3), and they had a 501(c)(4), ACS CAN, so they could do a little bit more on the advocacy side, not a little bit more, but a lot more. So we could find their voice and help us. And then the third thing, which was the thing that brought me probably the closest to ACS, is what we could count on them to do on any given day for our cancer patients. Things like we've got a cancer patient who needs to come here for treatment. They've got advanced disease. They don't have a place to stay. They're going to need to be here for 4 weeks for chemotherapy. What are we going to do? We're going to put them at the Hope Lodge, or we're going to work with the American Cancer Society to get transportation for them. So this patient support activity was really important. So then I started looking into ACS, and they had had some difficult times. So they had lost money 7 years in a row. It's not COVID, this is prior to COVID, right?
Hmm.
So losing money and then having to do RIFs every November, 7 years in a row. Okay.
Okay.
So what was the problem? I didn't understand because it was a mismatch for me with what I was touching and feeling in Philadelphia. And what I came to learn was something I had not fully appreciated, which was that the American Cancer Society had been a federated model for 100 plus years. At some
Mm.
point in time, there was a separate 501(c)(3)s in every state. More modern times, there had been 12 separate 501(c)(3)s with 12 CEOs and 12 strategies. And the CEO before they were looking for me had put it all together, so tried to do a merger, and it just stalled out for whatever reason that I don't fully completely understand. And so they were looking for somebody who knew oncology and who knew M&A to think through like what is the future. And so that really, I remember taking that phone call and hanging up and saying to my husband, like, I actually think I might have to think about this. And so I did, and ultimately decided to take it. I remember the hardest day was calling Steve Klasko to tell him I was going to leave Jefferson, and he was not very
Mm.
happy with me until I told him what I was going to do. And he said, "Oh, fill in the blank. You have to do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I do." So I left, went over to ACS, and man, we really hit the ground running. I love strategic planning. I found an incredible set of executives already there who had a sense of urgency to that they needed to totally think differently. So we changed everything. The mission of the organization that you really declared, like who are we standing for? And it's cancer patients and their families, our key two stakeholders. The mission of the vision, the mission became to improve lives of cancer patients and their families, something that I expected my team to do every day, and that's measurable, and to put business rigor behind that measurability. And then the vision to end cancer as we know it for everyone. I called those the 8 words that defined us. And that was our commitment to really ensuring that the kinds of things we do at ACS benefit the widest possible group of people possible. So we then anchored around 3 things that we do exceptionally well at ACS: research, advocacy, and patient support, that direct patient support. That's actually the biggest team. And
Mhm.
then just, I'll never forget, the time because they had been still operating in this federated way. So there was no real central knowledge about what we actually did. So I said, okay, all right. So we give rides to people every year. Who are they? Where do they come from? How far do they go? What kind of
Yeah.
cancers do they have? Is it men? Is it women? What are all of these things? And so I'll never forget having the team go back in each one of these little pockets and give us the data on patient support, housing, transportation, patient navigation. And people were almost in tears when they came back because all for the first time they realized the impact of what they do. And I'm like, yeah, impact is measurable. Let's go. Now let's put growth goals behind this. And so then we did. So we had growth goals for everything, for research, for advocacy, for patient support. And for advocacy, we put up this super high bar. It wasn't just like you advocate for a thing. It means you got to get a law or a regulation passed. Let's
Mhm.
go,
Mhm.
right? And so we did that. And then we let the world know this is what we were about. And then that put us on this, growth trajectory, which we grew really tremendously in impact and revenue to support that impact. Again, it's a business like any other. It's a business
Yeah.
of doing good in the world, but it's the business like any other, and it needed business rigor. And so, I loved it. And, it was 4 years of tremendous growth, and I'm incredibly proud of the team. I'm especially proud of the things that we did on the advocacy side, like durable solutions for patients, things like patient navigation becoming a reimbursable component of cancer care. It was one of our
Yeah.
major advocacy plays. It was one of, Karen Knudsen's personal dream to get that done. I'll never forget getting the call from the White House and saying, we're going to do this. Um, that was a really feel good day, and a whole series as well of laws and regulation passed at the state level too, which is as important as federal. There's no question about it. But I loved that, and and I really thought, my it's good. It's in a great place. And so, of course, when you're doing that kind of job, you get pulled into different things that people want you to do and you start to think about them. And one of the things that I really thought about at ACS was innovation, right? We fund all this science and it sits there on the lab floor. And like, how do you, common theme, care and world, how do you get it into the clinic? And so we set up an impact innovation fund. It was on the books and it was kind of on idle, and we put the gas on it, and that's bright edge. And so we started investing in early stage companies. Now, small investments, it's ACS. That's never going to be core to the business, but a really important, I would say, demonstration project. And over my time there, we had 26 investments. Some of them were follow on, and we had 8 exits. I'm sorry. I'm calling that a win.
Yeah.
And so, that's pretty good. Now, most of them are not therapeutics. Some are, some are not. It's everything from diagnostics to health services but it gave me that taste of what's possible. So then it started to become really evident to me that that was going to be my future destiny. That
Mhm.
getting ideas from the lab floor into the clinic through this time of needing to capitalize early stage companies so that they can get into the phase of patient testing and clinical research, which I consider, giving people access to the most advanced form of care. That's where there was a big need. And
Mhm.
so it started to attract me. So
Yeah,
now,
that's it.
you know, so now I'm at Parker. I'm on the board of a number, of early stage companies. I'm on the board of a pharma company. So it is, I really love it.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because one of the guests he is my first 4-time guest is Bill Taranto from over at Merck, who runs their global health, the sort of venture fund. And this one of the things he always talks about is sort of the scalability issue. And like, a lot of companies unfortunately don't think about it. And I think that's great in the sense that you were in that case running a sort of corporate venture group that, and you had that experience that, hey, if this technology is going to be useful, yeah, it's great that it's at the bench, but we got to scale it up to 16 hospitals over here at Jefferson or whatever the case may be. So I think that's a very, you seem to be leaving a trail of successes. I'll just put it that way. Every place you step, and so yeah, I'd love to go to Parker now, and again, we'll drill down on some of the focuses of the research there. But before we do that, could you just introduce the institute, who Sean Parker is, and a little bit again how you are you? I know it's on the headquarters on the West Coast. Have you moved? Are you still in Philly? What's the sort of where the leadership set up for you?
Yeah, let's take that on. So I made ACS and in walks Sean Parker. And so not literally, but into my world. And he tells me about something that I knew not enough about, and that's the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy. So he had started it 9 years ago, and the whole idea was almost identical to what I just said. Get ideas off the lab floor and into the hands of people, and take it a step further into commercialization. Like, let's be real. If we want to impact lives, we've got to get drugs all the way through to approval. And the average time from a discovery to FDA approval for an oncology agent is 10 to 15 years. So his idea, my words, is we got to compress that timeline. So he sets up the Parker Institute 9 years ago. The whole idea is now what I call a three-part strategy. One, fund the science. So, fund the bold, big bets, not the incremental stuff, right? Not the stuff that's going to get funded through other places, but the things that, if correct, could really move the dial. Understanding there's going to be a lot of failure in there, but you're also going to give people a position to be transformative. Part two, you don't fund people, you actually fund projects through master agreements with institutions so that then we set up a scientific director on that side, a scientific director on our side, and we decide on what the science is going to be. And on any given Tuesday, we can redirect those funds. So that's the way it works for us. And so, we're constantly looking at the science. What do we need to change? We are a medical research organization. We're not your typical 501(c)(3). We play a very active role in deciding what science gets funded and continuing to guide that science. Important component, very different than other organizations. Part two, at those places, we embed in the tech transfer office. So we, if someone's work is being funded by the Parker Institute, then we get vision, not ownership, but vision into that subject matter IP, all of it. So that now we have an opportunity to connect something wonderful you might be doing at the University of Pennsylvania to something wonderful I might be doing at Dana-Farber or at Stanford or at UCSF or Gladstone. So we have an opportunity to dot connect. That supports part three, start the company. So we form early stage companies, and we either are the lead investor or part of a syndicate. And the whole goal is then to make sure that we, if we're going to get behind that, have satisfied in our minds that we've de-risked the science, right? Because we've seen it all the way through from the beginning. No one's pitching us, right? This is our science that we've homebrewed and homegrown into these early stage companies that get formed, or that our IP or the IP from our investigators, from our Parker Institute investigators, can tack on because they've developed an asset that would make another company work better. So fast forward in these 9 years, you would expect it to start off on a big funnel science, ultimately get through the IP, and ultimately narrow down into these companies. So now we're long enough in existence, now 9 years, we have 17 companies in the portfolio, and almost $5 billion has been raised over there. So venture capital is clearly telling us that, that they believe in what it is that we're doing. A significant number of our companies are already in the phase of clinical testing. So that starts to meet Karen Knudsen's goal. And now, so now we're working at all ends. How are we thinking about how what's happening over here in our portfolio companies impacts the kind of science that we should do? Where's the gap in an asset that would really be helpful, or a technology that would really be helpful for what's happening over here in the companies? We can either do that through our existing sites or through a CRO strategy. We do have scientists in-house as well. We don't have labs, but we have scientists. And so how do we continue that ecosystem coming on? And how do we help our portfolio companies make sure what they need?
Yep.
But at the same time, we have to anticipate like what is the next science that's coming and how do we make that happen? So that's the way the whole thing works is unabashedly, right, to get from bench to bedside to commercialization.
Mhm.
And when things hit, when there's an exit, and we have had some exits, those that dollars of revenue comes back to the Parker Institute so that we can fund more science. So
Mhm.
that's where we are. It's pretty cool. And I don't think there's another model really out there like it. Now, who is Sean? Sean was the guy who started Napster, was one of the first presidents, if I'm getting this right, of Facebook, had a
Mhm.
heavy hand in Spotify. He is a brilliant guy. And I think, now that I know what he's done, I think he deserves a lot of credit for setting up this model that's really pushing forward immunotherapy, which, like, let's be real, that's in the metastatic space.
Yep.
That's what's providing cures, just full stop, right?
Yep.
And so, amazing. But it's not just that he has good intention. He's actually taken the trouble to learn the science. It's kind of like mind blowing because I can sit down with him and have an intensive discussion about the science. And for that matter, the clinical implementation, because he's been sitting on the board of some of these companies as well, right? Because
Mhm.
of course
Mhm.
we have an equity position at the Parker Institute. So before I came in, he was de facto functioning as a CEO for the last several years.
Yeah, and it's obviously an amazing mission. And some of the people you're partnering. I mean, it is no joke. I mean, Carl June from over here at Penn, Nobel Prize winner Jim Allison, Marcel Vandenbrink from over at the City of Hope. We profiled him several months ago. Yeah, I mean, let's because the mission turning all cancers into curable diseases, and clearly, four. You're talking about what's coming next. I mean, four major buckets here: CAR T, checkpoint inhibitors, novel neoantigens for targeted cancer therapies. We'll put the microenvironment on the side for a minute. We'll come back to that one. But the first three, clearly, it seems like the theme is, look, we got these very important targeted living drugs. We got to make them last longer, more targeted. We got to make them work better on these solid tumors. I think that's sort of where, so those three things, CAR T, checkpoint, your specialty from back in the day, and the neoantigens. And, Drew Weissman told us all about that a few months ago as well. I mean, this is the world. This is where it's all going, right? 25, but this is, probably what's going to be in 2030 and so forth. Walk us down this path a little bit, because I think it's very
Oh
important
yeah.
to what
So
the next
I'm going to
generation
say
is.
I'm going to say yes and to all of that. And I think a perfect illustration of where things are going. Well, I'm going to add vaccines to your list because I'm
Yeah.
super bullish about vaccination. So, but let's talk about as an example, an illustration of the Parker Institute pull through and where I think things are going. Dispatch. So Dispatch Bio just came out of stealth mode,
Okay.
and that was born at a Parker Institute retreat. We have these retreats twice a year that bring together our science. We just had one a couple weeks ago. Bring together our scientists, the CEOs of our portfolio companies, and our co-investors, right? We actually need to start to bring biopharma into the fold because, again, like speaking as a board member for biopharma, they want to see science earlier and they
Yep.
should, right? So that coming soon, but Dispatch. So Dispatch was born 2 years ago at a Parker Institute retreat, again, because of that ability to see the IP and pull it through for multiple institutions. So to make things relatively simplified, the whole goal of Dispatch, which has already been into clinical testing to prove this first point, which is to use viral infection to actually paint tumor cells by giving them a non-native antigen. So it's like nice to identify neoantigens when cancer cells have DNA mutations that start to put proteins on the surface that have never been seen before. And you find out what those are. There's a real place for that, important science.
Yep.
But what if there was a world where you could take specific to the tumor a way to infect them and throw up a flare? In fact, that's kind of the strategy that it's called, right? The flare. And then you know what this flare looks like because you designed it. So, okay, what can you do with that? Let's think about it. You can direct T cells to it. Okay. So we've got a lot of ways to make that happen and traditional cell-based therapy. You can create antibody drug conjugates. You can create radioligands. You can create imaging and diagnostics, right? If you're going to throw up a flare, right? It's the old adage, right? You treat what you see and see what you treat. And so if you can do that, then these kinds of technologies lend itself to even more than just immunotherapy. And that's, I'd say, part of like where we're going. So I should have said this, but we've got a new strategic plan. I'm putting it through the board next month, but not surprisingly, based on what I did at ACS, growth is the goal, growth and impact. And that's on the science, on our ability to generate meaningful IP, and in the portfolio company generation and output. And Dispatch is a perfect example of the fact that we're kind of going beyond just that traditional cell-based therapy. There are a lot of potential outcomes of what you can do with Flare. And so that is coming. So it's a perfect example of the kind of thing that we do. But I'm also anxious to ensure that we are putting our resources behind the next most important discovery. And so a way to do that was by continuing to build our scientific team. We already had a great scientific bench strength, and I wanted to bring it to, outstanding. And so recruited in Ira Melman from Genentech.
Yep.
Dr. Melman is like fantastic. I knew him because I've served for quite some time on the science review board for Genentech, and he, of course, ran the immuno-oncology team. And so when he left Genentech, we hired him in at the Parker Institute, and he's going to all of our sites with others in tow from Parker in order to really look at all of the science and do this assessment of, where are the gaps? Like, where should we be that we're not? Where are the synergies that we need to appreciate? So we're ramping up our ability to have vision into what we need to be doing more of. And, vaccination strategies, I think, will be one of them. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty exciting when you think about the kinds of studies that have been done. Like even, there's a New England Journal just a couple of months ago about, rectal cancer, which of course has a significant quality of life implication for patients who need surgical intervention. And it was not funded by us, but there's a study funded that allowed patients to opt in to getting a vaccination type strategy prior to surgical intervention. And some of them have had complete responses and were actually able to skip surgery. So now immunotherapy is getting us to the point where you can cure without cutting. Like now we're starting to get into a whole new paradigm in cancer and how, like, what are the key questions or key technology enablements that have to happen in order to scale that. So you can already start to, also imagine other futures of what does it look like to tell someone who's a BRCA carrier with a significant, mutation that is, renders that person highly susceptible to cancer formation. Is there a way to use immunotherapy to get ahead of it, to actually start to move into the prevention space? So these are some of the bold new territories we'll go into. And, we are very focused on the 90% of cancers that are metastatic, and that's solid tumor, by definition, hard to treat, hard to cure. But the thing we always try to remind people about immunotherapy is surgery works when you're in there cutting out. Chemotherapy works in the time that that drug is still circulating, that short time that it's still circulating in a patient's, body.
Mm-hmm.
Radiation therapy works at the moment that it's being administered. Successful immunotherapy can work for a lifetime.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Um, Karen, while we're on this topic, I would just love to get you because I mentioned there's that fourth basket of the tumor microenvironment, and one of my local heroes who we lost a couple of years ago from over at Fox Chase was Beatrice Mintz.
Yeah.
I never got a chance to meet, but I talked to her once on the phone some time ago. That's a different story. Who seminal work back in the 1970s that hey, a cancer cell in a different microenvironment can normalize and become kind of a normal cell. I'd love to just, I know, and in whatever you can talk about, I know you made some investments here, one in some really cool sort of oncolytic virus company called Cyoxis, but the microenvironment is one of those areas that we talk a lot about, but not as much as sort of the targeted immunotherapy stuff. And oncolytic viruses, I guess, fall into that. But could you say just a couple words about how you think about the tumor microenvironment specifically as a target for some of these developments?
Yeah, you're circling exactly around some of our priority areas moving forward. And if you just look at the data in pancreatic cancer, the tumor microenvironment plays such an important role in the way that that cancer behaves and responds to therapy. So these are some of our priority areas for investigation. And it includes things like, what does traditional cancer therapy do to the immune microenvironment?
Mm-hmm.
So just look at Pluvicto. Let's just take that for an example, right? So
My
this is
father, that was my
direct.
father-in-law was in that study, so just just
Oh,
a
he
note.
was.
And I
Oh,
profiled. I had the Novartis gang on to talk about it. So anyway, but no, keep going.
oh,
I
I
love
didn't know
Pluvicto.
that.
I love Pluvicto. No
Yeah, well, so
problem.
do I. Like, I think radioligands are
They're awesome.
incredible. To me, it's like the smart bomb of radiation therapy.
Yeah.
I really love the concept, and there's so much more opportunity there to think about linkers,
Yeah.
internalization. What is the right isotope? And then, of course, you've got to have what is the right antigen that you're going to go after. So I mean, like, it's just, to me, it's just such an area of exploration that is for prime time. And not to get too far away, I promise I'll come back, but if you look at the NIH and NCI budget, traditionally radiation therapy, despite the fact that so many people have it in the US every year, is traditionally underfunded. It's just a vastly underfunded area of research that I think we could be poised to do something about. So, so let's think about Pluvicto. Great. Okay. Incredible responses, and some patients were actually in a much more effective way driving radiation to prostate cancer cells based on a lot of work about what decorates those cancer cells and what controls that decoration. Okay, cool. What happens to the tumor microenvironment? And this is an important thing for us to really understand. Does it lend itself an opportunity to immunotherapy becoming more effective in prostate cancer? These are some of the kinds of studies that we really need to start to think about, of what does this next generation of either antibody drug conjugates or radioligands, how do those impact immune therapy? Because it's going to be very rare, right, that these immunotherapies are given in isolation. They're often given after, especially in the clinical trial space. So we need to think about partnerships, because we can't do it all alone. We need to think about partnerships to do it together. So in fact, we've already started to have some conversations with Astro. We're definitely having conversations with ASCO about things that we might want to do together. And I think that's also a hallmark of something that I brought to the American Cancer Society that I definitely would like to make sure we maintain at the Parker Institute, is recognizing that key strategic partnerships are going to be important for us to move as fast as we want to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's awesome. Really awesome. Um, one last thing while we have you, and I really do appreciate your time. In addition to all of this work that you're doing, you're also on several boards of directors, and one of them I just wanted to highlight, and that's Research America. And I've had the honor to profile several of your crew from over there, from Sudip Parikh to George Benjamin, Donna Shalala, Arthur Evans from the American Psychological Association. Clearly, you're there for a very important reason, and this is a very odd time, as you know, in sort of science funding and everything happening in DC. But can you just take a couple of minutes to sort of re-educate our audience on Research America, and a little bit of, when you're sitting there on that board, how you're championing, the need for more next generation
Yeah.
oncology research.
It's such a great board. I have to say, I'm about to cycle off, but it's been a really, really wonderful time to be on that board with a brilliant CEO, Mary Woolley. And it's where all disciplines come together. It's not just about cancer, it's where Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all types of research come together. Um, Many people on there have experience running an advocacy organization. Everyone has experience with science. And we think through what are the strategies to talk to the American public about the importance of biomedical research, but then also to provide elected officials with guidance and data. And so, one of the most recent surveys that which was just the beginning of the year, that we put out, showed unequivocally that the US public, a vast majority, believed that biomedical funding of research to improve health should be a major federal priority. And I mean, and the numbers were so high that you didn't even need to do the data cut. It was Republicans, it was Democrats, it was men, it was women, it was all ages. So I really think that these types of data empower and inform. I mean, look at what's happened, right? Of, Congress really suggesting that, yes, NIH, NCI, these are really important things for us to maintain.
Yep.
And, I think that when we look at data like the fact that, because people will say, well, how come you haven't cured cancer yet? Okay, let's talk about that. It's a great question. Cancer is 200 different diseases, and there are some that we have cured, and there are some that we're well on our way to curing, and there are others that are going the wrong way, or others that we've just really had difficulty making progress against. But in total, cancer mortality rates have declined 34% since 1991. That was the high watermark of cancer. And so if more people knew that, then I think even more people would understand the importance of research. So that's the whole point of Research America, is to not be about a disease or a person or any special interest. Not that diseases are special interests, but you get my drift.
Yep.
It's for all of us to advocate for what happens when science is turned into health. And we have so many good examples of that. And that's what that great organization is about. I've loved being part of it pretty much every minute. And I should say, I just came back late last night from Washington, D.C., where I was in a retreat held by the Milken Institute. Same thing, stakeholders from all across sections of biomedical research, leaders, and then leaders from industry, government officials, former government officials, current government officials at the highest possible level, who came to visit us as we talked about what a blueprint might look like moving forward for biomedical research and what we should be aiming for as a US public. We've got to get, I think, everybody really centered along why it's been critical, but why it's going to be so critical moving forward.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're there. Especially, advocating for this area. So no, that's again, brilliant.
Easy Amtrak ride up and down. I forgot to answer your question. Did I move? Well,
oh yeah, did you?
After having grown up in a military family and never having a home, right, and then raising two successfully, two kids here in Philadelphia, we're never leaving Philadelphia. I'll always be a Philly girl. It's impossible for me to leave Philly, nor would I want to.
Awesome.
But I do. But we're headquartered in San Francisco. I spend most of my time in San Francisco, or out at our sites. We have sites including here in Philly. We're meeting with our portfolio companies and key stakeholders in our world, like our co-investors. So my life, like at ACS, my life is on the road, but home base, always a Philly girl, and go Birds.
No, that's good. That's good to hear. And people, I try to do everything I can to promote Philly, and there should be more attention here. That's all I'll say. But no, that's awesome.
I'm with you on that one. We could have a whole podcast on why
Yeah.
Philadelphia is amazing. In fact, if you ever want to do that, sign me up.
Okay. We'll do that as a follow-up episode. But Karen, just while we have you, what else is coming up that we should know about as we get later into 2025, into 2026, in terms of conferences, either scientific or investor related, other talks, places that we could maybe run into you, meet you on the road, anything else that I missed while we have you today, please?
Yeah, I think it's so important for me to not only be on the road talking about what we're doing and pulling people along as partners, but also to learn of like what's happening. I think unequivocally, where we're keeping our eye and I'm keeping my eye is making sure I'm in the right places to understand the role of technology moving forward. To state the obvious, agentic AI is changing everything, and that will change everything to the conduct of how research happens in a laboratory, to the conduct of how we evaluate and leverage IP, to how our portfolio companies function and get into clinical trials. So, you can look at for me at areas where that kind of technology is going to continue. I was just at the Agentic meeting in New York. I'll be on stage at Health this year to talk about that. But of course, all the mainstreams, right?
Hmm.
ASCO is key to my universe, of
Sure.
course. And thinking through what these technologies are going to mean for our ability to get curative therapies to patients, but also to get it to the right patient. So I don't know if you saw this article. Did you see the Swanson et al. Article in Nature a couple of weeks ago about
Um,
the virtual laboratory creating COVID antibodies?
Something like, yeah, yeah, refresh our memory.
Yeah, this was borderline mind-blowing. So they basically trained agents and then used agents that had these different competencies because not every lab has somebody with data with every competencies. So
Right.
you had an agent that was the biostatistician, an agent who was the PI, even though there was a real PI in the loop here, right? The
Sure.
PI,
All right.
those that were taught that had expertise in antibody generation, like these agents were trained to have these competencies. And there was one, there was a science critic in there. And then they did a virtual lab meetings so that the data would come in, right? And the agents would evaluate the data coming in, generate hypotheses, work together to essentially, much as you would in a real lab meeting, where they have a discussion that's leading to next steps. So they were actually able to generate new antibodies against COVID-19 in a very short period of time, not by taking the human out of the loop,
Right.
but by utilizing agents to make science go faster. Some of our portfolio companies, like Zara, same thing, like using new technology to make the science go faster. And the way that we staff our labs, the way that we staff our clinics, the way that people get and process information is changing at such a rapid pace that for me, making sure that as an oncology leader, I am staying abreast of all that is really important. And then on the delivery side, so, one of the groups that I think is just knocking it out of the park in terms of vision is General Catalyst. So, General Catalyst, of course, is, one of the largest investment groups in the US, but the whole section of what they do called health assurance. And I had the privilege of, going to their summit and seeing what's happening in their portfolio companies about the way that technology and agentic AI is going to change care delivery, including cancer care delivery. And it's not a future state. It's a now state that's being
Yeah.
implemented. So I think we need to buckle in and be ready for change. So my goal is to make sure we're leading, not being left behind.
No, it's an awesome mission, and yeah, I mean it's a wild time we're in, and it's going to get wilder. But again, I'm excited for you. I wish you and your team there at the Parker Institute the best with all of this as you continue to move these important technologies forward and translate them into the clinic. But really, an awesome story. Again, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or who will be watching on the YouTube channel. You've been spending time with Dr. Karen Knudsen, Chief Executive Officer, Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy, doing really amazing things, as they say, turn all cancers one day into curable diseases. Karen, I really want to thank you for taking out the time on your schedule to talk to us for a little while, to walk us through your journey. Thank you for everything you've been doing and continue to do for patients. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. Really a great story.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. What you do makes quite a difference. Like I said, we've got to start telling this story of biomedical research much more effectively, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Really awesome having you.